In the spring of 1947, a boy named Muhammed climbs the limestone cliffs above the Dead Sea. He is looking for a goat that wandered too far from the herd. He is maybe 15. The sun is already hard on the rock by mid-morning, and the goat is nowhere. He has done this climb 100 times before. He knows every ledge, every shadow, every place a careless animal might wander. This time, mostly out of boredom, he throws a stone into a dark opening in the cliff face. He expects silence, or maybe the scrape of his stone against rock. Instead, he hears something break. Not a goat, not an animal scrambling for cover, something brittle, something old. Something that sounds, even from a distance, like it has been sitting untouched for a very long time. He does not climb down to look. Not that day. He tells himself it is nothing but a jar left by shepherds generations ago. However, he does not forget the sound. That small moment in Qumran will become one of the most important discoveries in world history. You will understand exactly why by the end of this video. But not yet. Right now, you need to go back further. Much further than 1947. Because the real story does not begin in a cave. It begins roughly 27 centuries earlier, with a prophet in a royal court, while a foreign army gathers at the border. It continues with a farmer in a small town nobody respected, and a teenage prisoner of war inside a foreign empire. The story also features a shepherd-turned-king writing about pain he had not yet felt. Finally, it involves a priest pricing a betrayal in silver long before anyone had actually been betrayed. This is not a story about a scroll or a cave. This is not a story about an accident. It is a story about a promise, written down piece by piece across hundreds of years. It was recorded by men who never met each other and could not have coordinated a single detail, even if they had tried. Stay with me, because once you see the pattern underneath all of this, you simply cannot unsee it. Here is what most people get wrong about Bible prophecy. They picture vague mood and metaphor, the kind of foggy poetry you can stretch to fit almost anything after the fact, the way a fortune teller's words can be twisted to match whatever happens next. That is not what is sitting in these texts. These are specific. Prophecies include a town named 700 years before anyone born there mattered to history. They trace a family line before that family existed. They also include a price, carefully counted down to the exact coin. A method of execution is described in exact physical detail. This was written centuries before that specific method of killing a human being had even been invented by the empire that would eventually use it to execute criminals. You are about to meet 5 people who never met each other. People who lived under different kings, in different empires, separated by centuries, with no way to compare notes, no way to read each other's writing before adding their own piece. A royal advisor, a rural farmer, an exiled teenager, a shepherd king, a temple priest, none of them knew what they were building. You are about to watch it get built anyway, piece by piece, until it lands with almost unbearable precision. The prophecies point to one man in an obscure province of the Roman Empire, on a night that changed history. By the time we come back to that broken jar in that dark cave, you will fully understand exactly what the young boy found. You will realize why this discovery changes the weight of everything you are about to hear. Let's start with the man in the royal court. His name is Isaiah, and he is not the soft Christmas card figure people picture when they hear that name. He serves in Jerusalem during the reign of King Hezekiah, in a small kingdom surrounded by enemies on every side. Assyria is the dominant power of the age, an empire known for crushing smaller nations without hesitation. Judah is exactly the kind of small nation in danger of being swallowed whole. Isaiah's job is not safe and it is not popular. He delivers warnings the king does not want to hear, and predictions the people would rather ignore. In the middle of an entirely different political crisis, almost as an aside, Isaiah says something strange. He tells the king that a sign will be given anyway, whether anyone asks for it or not. A young woman, the text says, will conceive and bear a son. His name will be called Immanuel, which means God with us. The Hebrew word behind young woman here is Alma. It does not simply mean any girl of any age. It carries the specific sense of a young woman of marriageable age, presumed to be unmarried. Isaiah is not writing a vague poem about motherhood in general. He points at something exact that will not make full sense for 700 years. Picture how strange that sentence must have sounded in its own moment. A king at war, soldiers gathering at the border, and a prophet talking about a baby whose name means God is with us. It does not fit the crisis at all, which is the point. Isaiah is not only speaking to his own century. He is speaking past it, over the heads of everyone listening, towards someone none of them will live to see. Now travel south, away from the palace, to a small farming town named Moresheth. This is where you meet Micah. Micah is not a court prophet with royal connections. He is a man of the soil, watching the powerful in Jerusalem grow wealthy, while ordinary families lose their land, their security, their voice. He is angry about it, and he says so loudly to people who do not want to hear it from a farmer. But it gets stranger than a farmer's anger. In the middle of Micah's warnings about coming judgment, he drops a detail with shocking precision. He says that out of Bethlehem Ephratah, a town so small it is barely worth naming on a map, will come a ruler whose origins are from of old, from ancient days. Bethlehem, in Micah's time, is not a place anyone expects greatness to come from. It is a footnote, a village you pass through, not a destination, and yet here is a farmer prophet, naming it by name, centuries before anyone born there will matter to a single soul outside that valley. You do not get to fake specificity like that after the fact. You either know or you guess. A guess this precise would itself be one of the strangest coincidences in human history. Hold that thought, because the next man takes this even further. Daniel is a teenager when he is dragged out of Jerusalem and marched into exile in Babylon. He grows up a captive in a foreign empire, serving under kings who are not his own. He watches his nation's temple lie in ruins from a vast distance. He cannot close this distance no matter how high he rises in a foreign court. This is grief with no easy resolution. He is a prisoner of geopolitics, a brilliant young man absorbed into a system built to deliberately erase who he is. And inside that captivity, far from home, Daniel receives a vision, numbers, a countdown. A precise span of years, counted from a decree to rebuild Jerusalem, to the moment a figure he calls the Messiah will be cut off. The word behind Messiah in the Hebrew text is Mashiach, the Anointed One, the title every one of these scattered prophecies has been quietly circling without ever fully landing. 3 men, a royal advisor, a rural farmer, and an exiled prisoner, none of them coordinating, none of them alive at the same moment as one another. And already this early in the story, you have a town, a sign, a title, and a timetable. These details are handed to you by 3 strangers who never read a single line the others wrote. There is one more thing you need before we move forward, and it might be the most personal piece of all. 1,000 years prior, David becomes king. He writes psalms, songs, and prayers about his own suffering, enemies, and fear in the middle of the night. In one of them, he describes being entirely surrounded, mocked, and physically pierced through his own hands and feet. He describes his enemies dividing his clothing among themselves and casting lots for it, the way soldiers might divide up a dead man's belongings. Here is the detail that should stop you cold. Crucifixion does not exist yet as a method of execution in David's world. The Romans will not invent it as a tool of empire for many generations. When David writes about pierced hands and feet, he is not describing anything he has ever witnessed. He thinks he is only writing about his own pain in his own moment. He has no idea he is describing, in exact physical terms, a method of death that has not been invented. You are not watching 4 isolated stories anymore. You are watching 4 threads of the same rope, tightening decade after decade, century after century, toward a single point none of these men could see from where they were standing. Pause here for a second and notice what just happened. 4 men, 4 different centuries, 4 different situations, a royal court, a farm, a prison camp, a throne. None of them read each other's work before writing their own. None of them could have. And already, without trying, they have handed you a town, a sign, a title, a timeline, and a method of death that has not even been invented yet. This is the part most people scroll past without realizing what they just watched. If this is starting to make the hair on your arms stand up a little, that is the correct response. Hit subscribe before we go further, because the next stretch gets even more specific. You do not want to miss the moment it all converges. Here is the part nobody tells you. We have not even reached the betrayal yet. Now go back to a man named Zechariah. He is a priest writing generations after the Babylonian exile, during the unglamorous work of rebuilding a ruined temple. Zechariah is not writing about kings and empires. He writes about something smaller and somehow more devastating. He writes about a price of 30 pieces of silver. He describes it as the value placed on a shepherd by the people he led. It is a humiliating sum, thrown back onto the temple floor and used to buy a field from a potter. Pay attention to this, because most people read straight past it. 30 pieces of silver was the standard price in the law of Moses for a slave. Zechariah is not inventing a random number to sound dramatic. He is describing someone being valued by their own people as property. They are treated as disposable and replaceable for the price of livestock. You can feel how personal this gets. A town, a sign, a timetable, those are details about a life from a distance. This is different. This is the exact price of a betrayal, written down 5 centuries before anyone would actually pay it. It gets harder to dismiss as coincidence, because in this same short book, Zechariah writes something even stranger. He says that one day, people will look on someone they themselves pierced, and mourn for him the way a parent mourns an only son. The Hebrew word is dakar, meaning pierced or thrust through. This is the same root idea you heard in David's psalm 1,000 years earlier. It shows up again here in a completely different book, written centuries apart by a different man. And this is where it gets remarkable. 2 unrelated authors, separated by hundreds of years, independently land on the exact same physical detail, describing a method of execution that, in both of their lifetimes, simply does not exist yet. Hold this together for a second, because there is another layer underneath that almost nobody notices. David's psalm does not stop at piercing. A few lines later, almost as an afterthought, he writes that not one of his bones will be broken. That phrase sounds small. It is not small. Roman execution by crucifixion often included breaking the legs of the condemned to speed up death, a brutal but ordinary step soldiers used routinely, almost as a formality. During one particular execution many centuries after David's lifetime, the soldiers normally carry out that exact procedure. However, for reasons unrelated to an old psalm, they check first, decide it is unnecessary, and leave the bones unbroken. You are watching 5 separate authors, writing in 5 separate centuries, under 5 separate governments, none of whom knew each other, none of whom could read each other's future, somehow all aiming at the same narrow target. A town, a sign, a timetable, a price, a method of death down to the smallest physical detail of which bones stay whole. Now watch what happens next. Because the story is about to narrow from a wide pattern into a single night, in a single life, the stakes stop being historical and start being personal in an unexpected way. Go back one more time to Isaiah. We are not looking at the sign about the child this time. We are looking at a different passage in his scroll. It is the hardest one. Isaiah describes a servant figure who is despised, rejected, and acquainted with grief. He says this man is brought like a lamb to the slaughter, offering no defense while being condemned. Then Isaiah adds a detail that should stop you cold. He says this servant, despite dying among criminals, will be buried with the rich. Think about that for a moment. A man executed like a common criminal, given a burial that does not match the manner of his death at all. This is not a story about a long list of fulfilled predictions or ancient coincidences stacked together. It is not about clever pattern matching invented after the fact by people desperate to make historical pieces fit. This story is about a target so incredibly narrow and specific that the only honest options left on the table are blind chance or design. Therefore, let us talk seriously about the chance and the odds of this actually happening. Statisticians who calculate the odds of one person fulfilling this many unrelated, centuries-old details by accident keep landing on staggering numbers. These figures are difficult to even say out loud without sounding like a massive exaggeration. Not 1 in 100, not 1 in 1,000,000. The numbers are so small they resemble the odds of picking one specific atom out of the visible universe twice in a row. You do not need to trust any one calculation to feel the true weight of it. You only need to count what you have already heard in this video: a named town, a specific timetable, a betrayal price tied to the exact value of a slave, a method of piercing centuries before that execution method existed, unbroken bones. There is also a burial that does not match the death. Each one on its own could be brushed off as chance. All of them converging on one life in one obscure province on one night is a different question entirely. Now go back to that cave. Remember the boy in 1947, throwing a stone and hearing something break in the dark. What he found was a library of ancient scrolls sealed in clay jars for nearly 2,000 years, though it took scholars years to understand. These were hidden by a community near the Dead Sea before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. Among those scrolls was a complete copy of the book of Isaiah. Scholars dated it by the style of the handwriting and direct testing of the material. It was dated to roughly a century or more before Jesus was even born. That detail matters greatly. Skeptics have long argued that maybe these prophecies were written down or quietly edited after the events they describe to fit what had happened. The scroll the boy stumbled into, almost by accident, completely ends that argument. The specific words about the suffering servant, the piercing, the unbroken bones, and the burial among the rich were sitting in a jar in a cave, untouched. They remained sealed and silent before the man they describe was ever born. You cannot edit a prophecy after the fact if the copy proving its original wording was sealed in clay before the fact. The Jewish historian Josephus wrote about this. Writing decades later, he mentions this man as a real historical figure who lived, taught, and was executed under Pontius Pilate. He is not a legend assembled generations later by people who never knew him. He is a man inside dated history. He lived under Roman law in the very century the convergence was always pointing toward. Stand back from all of it for a moment and look at the whole shape of it together. A royal prophet names a town, while a farmer names a ruler from of old. An exiled teenager counts years toward a moment he calls cut off. A shepherd king describes pain he never experienced. A priest prices a betrayal in silver. A sealed desert scroll confirms none of this was rewritten afterward. And a Roman record, completely outside the faith, confirming the man at the center of it actually lived and died exactly when the convergence said he would. You are not looking at a coincidence anymore. You are looking at a plan. So here's what you actually walked through today, in case the weight of it got lost somewhere in the details. The first thing worth taking with you is simple. These were not written after the fact. 5 different men, 5 different centuries, no contact with each other, no way to coordinate a single detail, and the physical text proving it, sealed in a jar in the desert, older than the man it describes. That is not folklore passed down by word of mouth. That is a documented, dated, physically verifiable pattern you can go and check for yourself. The second thing is harder to keep at arm's length. This was never just ancient history for someone else to study from a safe distance. Those prophets wrote toward a moment meant to matter to real people in pain. They needed to know they were not forgotten by whoever was actually running history. If the pattern is real, it was never only about proving a point to skeptics centuries later. It was about a promise being kept on time, to the exact year, town, and detail. The one making the promise simply always intended to keep it. And the third thing is the one I want you to sit with the longest. Think about someone planning the price of a betrayal 500 years in advance, and the manner of a death before that method of dying had even been invented. If they could leave a sealed copy in a cave to prove none of it was edited afterward, then your life was never too small or too late for that same attention. The God who counted years in Daniel's exile does not lose track of details. He priced silver in Zechariah's warning and let David write about pain he had not yet felt. He is not the kind of God who loses track of details, including yours. Which one of these prophecies actually hit you the hardest today? The pierced hands and feet written before crucifixion existed, the betrayal price counted to the coin, or the scroll in the cave that closed the door on every written after the fact theory? Tell me below. Because if this pattern is real, it was never about proving a point to someone far away, in a textbook, in an argument you will never have. It was always somehow written with you in mind.